What's happening, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. Today, we are previewing the SEC West. We'll be going around talking to all of our great Locked On experts, previewing the best part of the SEC West, the more dominant part in recent years. In just a second, we're going to talk with our buddy Luke Robinson, host of Locked On Bama. Let's get this thing started.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, when you talk about the SEC and the dominance across the country, you talk the Alabama Crimson Tide. And joining us now to talk all things about the Alabama Crimson Tide is the host of Locked On Bama, Luke Robinson. Does a fantastic job. Luke, how are you, my friend?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
Absolutely. Let's just start here, Luke. What's the biggest storyline for the Alabama Crimson Tide heading into the start of the season, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, it's got to be Bryce Young, right? The young quarterback who comes in with all the accolades. He was the number one quarterback in the country by many of the services when he signed with Alabama, right, either ahead of or right behind DJ Uiagalelei at Clemson. So he doesn't have the experience that DJ Uiagalelei has at Clemson. If you remember, DJ got to play against Notre Dame on the road last year in a big spotlight game, threw for over 400 yards. Bryce Young's only attempted 22 passes at Alabama. He has one touchdown. And it's odd because he's getting so much Heisman hype because he is the quarterback at Alabama, which is a little bit ironic because no quarterback at Alabama has won the Heisman yet.
It is a great point. I mean, we talk about how they've been able to, go from Mac Jones learning behind Tua and these other guys and stepping in when it's his time and shining. Tua obviously had an opportunity to learn a little bit behind Jalen Hurts before he was thrown into the fire. Bryce Young, you just kind of wonder. He didn't get a lot of playing time last year. How much is that run game, leaning on that run game, going to help him, especially early on? Because, man, you talk about 2 out of the first 3 games, you get a top 20 team in Miami on a neutral field, and then week 3, you're on the road at the Swamp. And I know Florida's supposed to take a step back this year, but those are 2 really tough early tests of the season. Yeah,
they're huge, and it's going to be difficult. Look, I know Alabama fans believe they're just going to run roughshod over every team they play, and they've earned that right to feel that way. However, it is going to be difficult. Miami brings a lot of talent into Mercedes Dome, and Florida certainly has a lot of talent, and Dan Mullen has proven to be a very worthy adversary. Now, you talk about leaning on the run game, and the issue with that is, okay, you can say that in general, but let's be more specific. Who exactly are you going to lean on? I think the running back room is stacked, but I'm a recruit, Nick, and so I'm a little biased in the sense that I know Jace McClellan was a borderline 5-star. I know that Kamara Wheaton was a 5-star, and Trey Sanders was a 5-star, and Roydell Williams was a high 4-star, and Brian Robinson, as I worked for the AHSA radio network, I remember his running for over 400 yards in a game as a high school senior. I know that running back room is stacked, but who exactly is going to be the man at running back? Alabama's had a pretty nice history of platooning running backs at the same time having a very distinguished number one. Derrick Henry's Heisman year, for example, he still had Kenyon Drake back there. And Najee Harris last year, when Brian Robinson would come in, he looked pretty doggone good. But can Brian Robinson do it for the amount of time and amount of carries that a Najee Harris did, that a Derrick Henry did, or even going back to Mark Ingram having Trent Richardson as his backup? Can he be the guy that totes the rock that many times? I personally believe that eventually somebody like a Jace McClellan or a Trey Sanders will end up getting the bulk of the carries, even if they're not the starter.
Let's talk expectations, Luke. I mean, everybody at Vegas seems to think they're going to run the table and go undefeated once again. I don't know if Saban's done that since he's been there, had back-to-back undefeateds. He just finished one undefeated, but it always feels like that next year they slip up somewhere along the way they lose a game. In your mind, do they slip up, or are they undefeated and representing the West in Atlanta?
I'm going to predict them to go undefeated, at least in the regular season. I think when they get into the playoffs, it's obviously going to be very difficult again, but Alabama will have as good a shot as anybody. It's just so tough to predict. When you want to say, okay, I think Alabama will somewhere, that's fair, because for the most part, Nick Saban is only going. He went undefeated in 2009, went undefeated in last year, obviously, and he went undefeated in 2018 until he got to Clemson and ran into a buzzsaw. Also went undefeated in 2008 until he got to Florida and Tim Tebow, which ended up winning the national championship. So there are times when Alabama goes undefeated and they end up losing to the eventual national champion too. This could be one of those years. But, I think Alabama's got as good a shot as anybody. I mean, anybody that's up there in the playoff discussion, they name a team that doesn't have question marks. Ohio State certainly has them. Clemson certainly has them. I mean, even though I mentioned I'm high on DJ Uiagalelei as anybody, he's still inexperienced relatively. So I think they've got some issues, and they don't have a Trevor Etienne anymore. So I think that there's plenty of teams with questions, and then of course Georgia has some questions. Oklahoma. I mean, look, Oklahoma, for all of their success recently, every time they get into the semifinals, they lose. They hadn't been to the championship game since the playoffs started. So a lot of question marks for everybody. And if that's the case, and we're really talking about 6 to 8 teams that have a chance to win the title, I'm going to take Nick Saban over everybody else.
Catch Luke Robinson with his cohort in crime, Jimmy Stein, hosting Locked on Bama. You guys do a fantastic job, and thanks so much for the time, Luke.
Hey, appreciate it, Chris. Thanks so much for having me.
Need to remind you guys about our friends over at Built Bar. Celebrate your freedom of choice. Did you know that Built Bar has so many delicious flavors, from coconut, cherry barcia, raspberry, mint brownie, my favorite, the double chocolate, salted caramel, strawberry, orange, cookies and cream, German chocolate, tons of different flavors. If you haven't tried them all, I recommend you get the mixed box where you'll get 2 of each of the 9 flavors. Try them all. Many of them packed to the gills with 17 to 18 grams of protein in there, only 130 to 180 calories, 4 grams sugar, 4 grams net carbs. Amazing flavors, all of them tasty, and all of them healthy for you. Order them today. You can try them out, get that raspberry and the mint brownie, which I like a lot. And Built Bar is the official protein bar of the U.S. track and field team, which is really cool. Go to Built.com right now. Use our promo code LOCKED15, that's LOCKED15, and you will get 15% off your order. When you use the promo code LOCKED15, get 15% off your first order at Built.com. Built Bar, go check them out today. I guarantee you will not regret it. They are awesome and a great healthy alternative. Rolling along here, Locked on SEC, our SEC West preview. And a pleasure now to be joined by our buddy Zac Blackerby, host of Locked on Auburn. And he joins us now. Zach, what's going on, man?
Gordy, nothing much, man. I'm ready for some college football. What about you?
It is getting so close, man. It is so exciting. We've got so many good teams across the SEC this year. So let's start with the team that's near and dear to your heart, the Auburn Tigers.
Sure.
What's their biggest storyline heading into the start of the season?
I mean, it's got to be quarterback. I know there's a lot of talk about Brian Harsin right now, but there's this belief that Bo Nix isn't going to be the guy. I'm not buying it. But still, I think it's good that there's an open competition. Bo Nix versus TJ Finley, the former LSU massive quarterback, 6'7". But, I mean, he's impressed guys. He's really impressed folks throughout fall camp. It seems like he's won over a lot of his teammates. But the biggest storyline right now, one is the quarterback battle. And then also, whoever is that quarterback, once again, I think it will be Bo Nix. Can he take that next step? How much better does he look in this Brian Harsin offense opposed to the Gus Malzahn offense from 2019 and 2020? I think he's going to take a huge step. I think scheme's going to help him out. And then obviously, there's that guy behind him, Tank Bigsby. He's going to make a lot of things a lot better for this offense as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, Zach, we start to see all the preseason watch lists and preseason All-American teams and all this, and a lot of people very high on Tank Bigsby. A lot of people think he will be the best running back in the SEC this year. What does he bring, and what do you think he does in year 2 to improve his game and take it to the next level?
I think he does everything. As far as what he does better this year opposed to last year is I think you may see him a little bit better in the blocking game as far as protecting Bo Nix on third down situations. You didn't really see the true freshman last year do that a ton. I think you're going to see him be a little bit better there. And also, Harson's talked about getting his running backs involved in the passing game. And I think a lot of Auburn fans kind of assume, Sean Shivers may be kind of the role for that. I think Tank Bigsby is going to be a big part of that because I think Harsin and his staff, they're looking at Tank Bigsby as a guy that could be a premier dude at the next level. And in order for you to do that and to recruit other guys like that, you need to put him in the league. You need to put him in the league where he gets drafted in the first 2 rounds or so. Tank Bigsby's that good. The issue here is the offensive line is not that good. And so how good can Tank Bigsby and Sean Shivers be? Jarquez Hunter is probably going to be the number 3 running back. He's impressed a lot of people as a true freshman. He's out of Mississippi. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what these, I think, pretty talented running backs, what can they do behind this kind of iffy offensive line?
Derek Mason, a very experienced defensive coordinator, of course, was very good in his time at Stanford. Mixed bag as a head coach at Vanderbilt, but now he's back in that defensive coordinator spot at Auburn in a position where he's thrived in the past. How good can this Auburn defense be this year?
I think it can be one of the best Auburn defenses ever. And, some people may hear that and say, oh, he's exaggerating a little bit. There's not a whole lot of weaknesses with this defense. I think Derek Mason has come in and sure, he's changed the scheme. He's changed what the front seven is going to look like and some stuff that they're going to do on the back end. But it really fits what the skill set of these players are. Auburn's front seven is going to be very, very physical, extremely athletic, and extremely versatile. Things that Derek Mason likes, as well as Brian Harsin's mindset. He wants guys that can do multiple things. And on the back end, I think Auburn's defensive backfield may be the most underrated unit in all of college football. I think they're very, very good. Roger McCreary, extremely overlooked on a lot of these preseason lists. I think he's going to be a special, special player. I could see him being like Noah Igbenogany from a few years ago, shooting up those draft boards and people saying like, where did this guy come from? And it's like, no, this guy's been here all along. They got him from South Alabama, 3-star kid, and he has been nothing but great since he stepped up on the Plains. You got Smoke Monday as a leader. Auburn announcing Wednesday, Brian Harsin tweeted out their 2 captains, their permanent captains for their team this year, both linebackers, Owen Papo and Chandler Wooten. And Wooten's an interesting case. He opted out last year. Auburn's getting him back. So a ton of depth at linebacker. And then, as we scoot our way closer to the line of scrimmage, the defensive front, I think the way that Derek Mason's going to kind of line up this defense, you're going to see a lot of outside linebackers close to the line of scrimmage. Derek Hall is set to take a big step forward. Eku Leota, the transfer from Northwestern, is going to have a lot of opportunities to rush the passer, as well as guys like T.D. Moultries apparently had a really good fall camp. And then the big man, the grad transfer from UAB, Tony Fair, the 300-plus pound player. He's got a chance to be really special in the middle of the field. And then, there's just so many guys up front. Marcus Harris is a transfer from Kansas that's won over a lot of folks in this locker room. And then, of course, Colby Wooden is going to be one of the best players on this team.
Before we turn the page on Auburn, what's a realistic win total for them this year?
That's a great question. And I think depending on the mood I'm in when you ask me that question, it floats between 7-5 and 8-4. And I'm in a good mood today. I'll say 8-4. There's 6 games on Auburn's schedule that it's like, okay, those are the toss-up ones. It's Penn State, at LSU, and then at Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and I'm blanking on the last one that I've been saying. But, I mean, there's going to be a lot of those games where it's like, can Auburn seal the deal in those contests? And that's really what it's going to come down to. And so can Auburn go 500 in those games and take care of business outside of that? It's like, okay, I think all of a sudden then it's like this is an 8-4 team. A lot of Auburn fans saying possibly 9-3. I have a hard time seeing that. I think they're going to slip up somewhere despite how good they are. But, yeah, I think this could be an 8-4 football team when it's all said and done.
All right, we asked you to do a little stretch assignment for us, Zach, since we don't have a locked-on host covering the Ole Miss Rebels. Give us a thought on Ole Miss. What's the biggest storyline for them heading into this season?
Can the tandem of Matt Corral and Lane Kiffin, can they continue their excellence that we saw from a year ago? The media seems to think so. People who vote on pretty much everything college football and SEC, they seem to think so. They're putting them on every list possible. And I think it's well-deserved. I think from a production standpoint, both of those guys were very, very impressive with what they did a year ago and kind of their first year together. Can they take that next step forward? There's a lot of film on these guys now. They didn't really have that a year ago. So can these defensive-minded coaches throughout the SEC adapt? To me, that's the biggest question regarding Ole Miss.
Who finishes with a better record in the SEC West, Ole Miss or Auburn?
I'm not high on Ole Miss this year. So I may not be the right guy to ask. I think Ole Miss and LSU are kind of the two teams where it's like, okay, I'm not seeing the same thing that everyone else is. So it's going to come down to that Auburn-Ole Miss matchup later in the season, but I think Auburn wins that game.
Yeah, only thing I'd say is maybe at least LSU and Coach O have a track record that, okay, they should get back on track. Lane Kiffin, we kind of don't know. I mean, he's been such a mixed bag throughout his head coaching tenure. You could be way up, it could be way down. You just never know. That's what makes him so fun and so unpredictable. Zac Blackerby, host of Locked On Auburn. Thanks for the time, man, and looking forward to the start of the season.
Gordy, always appreciate chatting with you.
Rolling along here, Locked On SEC, continuing our SEC West preview, and now a pleasure to be joined by the one and only Matt Moscona, host of Locked On LSU, as we turn our attention to the LSU Tigers. Matt, good to see you, man. How are you?
Gordo, I'm great, man. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. So what is the biggest storyline for the LSU Fighting Tigers heading into this season?
Well, it's sort of a redemption year. Let's see if LSU can bounce back after a dismal 5-5 showing where they had literally the worst defense in the history of the program. 130 years, they've never allowed 35 a game before last season. It was awful, and it's a giant part of why Ed Ogeron had to retool his entire staff. Turned over half of his assistants, got much younger on staff, returned a bunch of talent and starting players. But it all falls under the overarching theme of it's a revenge tour of sorts for LSU to make right after all that went wrong in 2020.
Is it as simple as say, Matt, because I'm seeing all these preseason watch lists, and I'm seeing a lot of guys, Derek Stingley Jr., Eli Ricks, a lot of names making these watch lists. Is a matter of they've got the talent. It was just such a bad scheme. Now they have the pieces in place to have a much better scheme this year.
Yeah, look, to be clear, I'm not going to say that with different coaching they would have been a championship contender a year ago. But should they have been able to score 40 at Missouri and win that game? Yep. They scored 38 at home against Mississippi State and lost. Would that have been different? Yep. I mean, it was just such a statistical outlier. Derek Stingley didn't forget how to play football. Elias Ricks was a 5-star. I mean, LSU, year in and year out, you said it. They put as many players in the pros as any team, and they had enough talent last year to be far better than that record. And they have enough talent this year to play with anybody on their schedule. I'm not going to suggest they're going to beat everybody on their schedule, but this is a team that, given some of the question marks they have against a very difficult schedule, it is realistic to think that if that defense has improved and plays to their talent level, that this is a team that could be vying for a New Year's 6 spot. And if they haven't figured out what ailed them a year ago, LSU will probably be looking for a new head coach.
Let's talk a little bit about the offense. We know Miles Brennan was supposed to be, or at least competing for the job. Max Johnson now named the starter with the injury, the offseason injury to Miles Brennan. How good can this offense be with Max Johnson, at least with a couple of weeks before the season, knowing he's the guy and they can move forward with all the first-team reps with him?
Yeah, look, I mean, a year ago, they had Jamar Chase opt out. He's pretty good. Terrace Marshall opted out. He's pretty good. Eric Gilbert opted out the final 2 games. You had an injury to your veteran quarterback and ended up playing 2 true freshmen, and you still scored 32 a game. LSU's problem last year was not the offense. As much as everyone's going to talk about quarterback, and rightfully so, and Jake Pete's coming in to run the Joe Brady offense from 2019 and all that stuff. And I understand why that's a talking point. That's not going to be what determines if this team ends up or wherever this team ends up. Specifically on Max Johnson, what you said I think is completely legitimate. Had LSU spent the last 2 weeks trying to figure out who was going to be the starting quarterback, it would have taken away reps from the eventual starter. And it also likely would have caused some division, as you would have had some players on the team that would have wanted Max to win and other guys who might have wanted Miles to win the job. As unfortunate as the injury to Miles Brennan is and was, it did provide clarity. It allowed LSU to use all of the month leading up to the UCLA game to give all of the first-team reps to Max Johnson, to allow him to get his cadence with the center, allow him to get his timing with the running backs and receivers, allow him to take ownership of the huddle and be the unquestioned leader. I mean, all of that is a net positive for this team and for this offense. It's an unintended positive with Miles Brennan's injury, and it's unfortunate, but if that time is used correctly, that is a positive for this offense in 2021.
Some tough road trips for LSU this year. Obviously, Tuscaloosa, we'll leave that one aside, but of a road trip to Kentucky, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, which one concerns you the most?
All summer I've picked Ole Miss to beat LSU. But I think Kentucky's interesting because LSU has historically struggled in Lexington. I don't know why. They won that Bluegrass Miracle game in 2002. In 2001, they won on a touchdown pass with like 7 seconds left. They lost there in 2007, one of their triple overtime losses the national championship team had, and they haven't played there since 2007. So it's a weird trip, and it falls smack dab between the Auburn and Florida games. So it is that Kentucky one, circle that is sort of the traditional trap spot game. But Ole Miss, I think, is the one, Gordo. It's the 5th of 5 consecutive SEC weeks for LSU. It'll be right after that gauntlet I just talked about, Auburn, Kentucky, Florida. Then you're at Ole Miss. I think Lane Kiffin's the best offensive coach in the SEC. Matt Corral's a great quarterback. And Ole Miss scored 48 in Baton Rouge with Matt Corral throwing 5 interceptions. So, I mean, if he had actually protected the football, they might have scored 100. So I think that Ole Miss game is a really tough one for LSU. I think Ole Miss is the surprise team in the West. I don't think they win the division, but I think they have a nice season. They do spoil some other seasons.
Talking with Matt Moscona, host of Locked On LSU. So realistically, Matt, win total. I mean, we're talking, it could be anywhere from 8, 9, even 10 wins. Where are you right now realistically this year?
Oh, I think in the SEC, LSU has the widest potential scale of wins. If everything fell apart, they lose to Bama, they lose the Ole Miss game I talked about, they lose to A&M, they fall in that trap game at Kentucky, they maybe lose one of the Auburn, Florida games. I mean, you could be talking about a 7-5 football team. Very easily, you could be talking about a 7-5 football team. If everything goes their way, I mean, think of it this way. For whatever stock you put into Vegas, when you look at projected point spreads, 5 of LSU's games, the spread is within a field goal one way or the other. I mean, you have half of your schedule is a virtual coin flip. I mean, it's incredible. If it all goes your way, I mean, you could be standing there at 11-1 at the end of the season. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I think realistically, this is a team that's a 9-3 football team. I think they lose to Bama on the road. I mentioned I think they lose Ole Miss, and I think they probably drop either A&M or Florida. Now, the flip side of that is you also have some really nice wins. I mean, you beat Auburn, you get a nice win at UCLA, you beat Mississippi State and Kentucky in some road SEC games. You probably snag a nice win against either A&M or Florida. I just think this can really resemble that 2018 season, which, you know, for LSU, it was a 9-3 year, and they had a disappointing loss at Florida, and they lost to Bama. But, man, they beat top 10 Miami. They beat beat the doors off of number 3 Georgia. They had a great win against Auburn on the road, that walk-off field goal by Cole Tracy. You know, you had some marquee wins, and that set the stage for a championship run in 2019. I think that's what this season is for LSU. I think it's a season where they reestablish themselves among the nation's elite. They probably get back into that New Year's Six, and 2022 is the season where I think LSU is really poised to make a run for another championship.
Yeah, the question is, will they be playing Texas and Oklahoma that season
Yeah.
to get to that point? We will see what happens. Matt Moscona, host of Locked On LSU. Appreciate the time, man. Thanks so much.
All right, Gordo. See you, man.
All right, more right after this. It is that time of year again, folks. Time for football to start. We've got college football games happening this weekend, the start of the SEC next weekend, and of course the NFL games right around the corner. And we want to remind you, BetOnline is the #1 spot for all the pro and college football action this season. Get all the updated odds, props, and contests, including online's biggest $500,000 NFL mega contest and the world's largest $200,000 NFL Survivor contest. Open now at betonline.ag. You can head to their website right now, do so on your mobile device, sign up today, and receive your 100% welcome bonus when you use our promo code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON. Be sure to take advantage of all their great promotions they got going on there right now, from football, basketball, boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait and take advantage of all the great offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way for you to bet on all your sports action. Head over there right now, betonline.ag. They are your online sportsbook experts. Sign up today. You want to make sure your account is ready to go for the start of the football season. Tons of action to get in on. What are you waiting for? betonline.ag. Roll along here, Locked On SEC, continuing our SEC West preview. And a pleasure now to be joined by host of Locked On Aggies, Mr. Cole Thompson on Twitter. Well, we'll just call him Cole Thompson today. Cole, what's going on, man? Welcome in. Thanks for joining us.
Anytime, Gordy. I'm glad to be here, and at least now we have some news coming out of Texas A&M that is something to talk about, and we don't have to be speculating anymore come September 4th. We already know the answer to it.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is the biggest storyline for the Aggies heading into this season? But you hinted at it as Jimbo Fisher just this week announces Haynes King officially the starting quarterback. What do you make of the announcement, and how excited are Aggie fans knowing that he's their guy?
I'm not shocked. I will say that when I was able to go to practice, you're able to see a really nice rapport both from Haynes King and Zach Calzada. Both of them really look strong passing the ball deep downfield. But I think what you look at is what is going to be the biggest knock against Texas A&M? That is the offensive line. And I really thought that going into this year, whoever was going to be playing quarterback had to be able to match the offensive line talent. And I do think that this offensive line is going to be good. Do I think it's going to be at that same level as it was last year that allowed 4 sacks in an all-SEC season? Maybe. I mean, they have a lot of good talent. Layden Robinson is showing off why he is a road blocker up the middle at offensive guard. They're trying out both Jameer Johnson, the SEC transfer from Tennessee at right tackle, and true freshman Ruben Fothery out of, I think it's Richmond, Texas, has done a really nice job transitioning in just a short amount of weeks from the high school level to SEC play. So there's a lot of potential, but this is a unit that is still replacing 4 total offensive linemen, including everything but, Kenyon Green, who's moving from an all-American left guard to an all-American left tackle. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So ultimately, you have to go with somebody who can move outside the pocket, evade pressure a little bit more. That's exactly what you get with Haynes King. Still a really good arm strength, still a little bit more mobile. One of the top 5 dual threat quarterbacks in the country coming out in 2020. And this was a kid who was an all-proven winner, 16-0 during his first season at Longview High School. 2 losses, had over 30 touchdowns in his final year, had 42 touchdowns going into his record-setting all 6A Division II state championship season. He is an all-purpose player, exactly what you want at that quarterback position, and he reminds me a lot of what you saw from Jameis Winston kind of coming out, maybe a little bit more lean kind of player, has that mobility, can move outside the pocket, has a good deep ball presence, and I think that he has built a really nice rapport with some of these young receivers.
Let's talk about some of the pass catchers. We know Anais Smith, the running back, kind of do it all, became one of their go-to passing threats or receiving threats last year. But to me, it starts with Jalen Watermeyer. He led them in receiving receptions last year. I made a prediction earlier this week. I think he's going to do it again this year. But how many weapons does Haynes King have to throw the football to?
He's got about 7 or 8 really good ones. The question is, who's going to be the elite one? That was the biggest thing missing last year. You kind of brought it up. They didn't have an elite wide receiver. Anaya Smith was a do-it-all weapon. He lined up basically everywhere from the slot to the linebacker position. Jalen Weidemeyer, really good tight end. But you also have to realize you need a number one wide receiver. And Chase Lane, even though he averaged 14.2 yards per catch last year, he really didn't do much after the catch. A lot of those passes were on 13-yard receptions, on 12-yard receptions. Was traveling that far, and he was down right away. So you need that player who can extend the field. You're getting back a healthy Caleb Chapman, somebody who showed off why last season he could be a difference maker as a vertical threat in the very first 3 games of the year, having that big touchdown against Florida before tearing his ACL. You're getting a full season of Damon Demas, another vertical option, 5-star, 5-tool player coming out of Tomball High School that is going to be able to take that next step with a full offseason in Daryl Dickey's system. But I really like a guy in Moose Muhammad III. This is a guy who has come out. He has shown consistently in camp why he deserves to take some of those first-team reps. And he's the son of former Pro Bowl wide receiver Muhsin Muhammad II. So you know that there is already that NFL background. And the one thing I will say about wide receivers who are taught by players or by fathers who have played in the NFL, they get to learn the system a little bit faster. They get to kind of see those reps, outside of going to these wide receiver training camps, these camps across the country. They get to actually learn from their dad, and that's an extra boost. That's exactly what you're seeing with Moose Muhammad. So there's going to be some really big playmakers this year. Anaya Smith is going to be one, Chase Lane, Caleb Chapman, Damon Demas. I think Moose Muhammad is going to be a really big name, but they're also going to be able to run a bunch of 12-man personnel with the healthy Baylor Cup. Keep in mind that this was one of the top tight end prospects coming out in 2019, and nobody has seen him because he's had season-ending injuries during fall camp. He's now healthy. He is now stable. Being able to run this 12-man personnel for this offense that's going to want to run the ball a ton is very influential, but you have a ton of weapons for Haynes King to be able to work with in 2021.
Cole, we know Texas A&M, as good as they were last year, they just missed making the playoff. But, man, this year really does feel like they control their destiny from a standpoint of how the schedule sets up. And I hate to say it, it becomes that one-game season, but it really is. That Alabama game in October, I mean, if A&M can find a way to win that game, man, they are in the driver's seat. They are controlling their destiny in terms of the SEC West and getting to Atlanta. If they lose that one, man, it just feels like kind of like last year. You try to pick up the pieces, run the table, and maybe you get in as an at-large team. But how important is that game, and how focused should A&M be on that Alabama game this year?
I can tell you from every single press conference, there's one question asked about Alabama. There's one question always asked about Alabama because that's the most important game. It is circled on the calendar. It is starred on the calendar. It is mentioned every single time it is brought up in some type of conversation. Alabama, Alabama, Alabama. And this is the very first year where I actually will say you are allowed to have that conversation going into the season. You are actually allowed to have that conversation right now and be able to stand on your 2 feet and go, you know what? We're not there, but we have the opportunity to be there going into this season because of what we did last year. A 9-1 finish, the only loss coming in week 2 by a 28-point differential. If this game is played in week 9, if this game is played in week 10 of last season, does Alabama win that game? Probably. Do they win it by 28? Absolutely not. It was a whole different team that you saw from week 2 to week 10 when they did finish 9-1 on the year and the highest finish in the AP poll since their national championship seasons in 1939. This is definitely a team that has all the makings to go ahead and make a run for the college football playoff and actually probably hoist up the national trophy when all is said and done. They're that talented of a team. But nobody's going to care if you can't get past Alabama. That has been the Achilles heel of Texas A&M, trying to show that they are a contender, not only in the SEC, but in the college football spectrum in general. You have to beat the best. You have to be the best. If you want to be the best, you have to beat them. It is circled October 9th. It is going to be a night game. It is going to be the most influential game of the season, I think, for Texas A&M. But you also got to remember, you can't blow everything out right after that. You got good games coming up afterwards against a Missouri team that looks improved, against a Ole Miss team that's going to be threatening, against an LSU team that is not going to go away quietly now that they have Bo Pelini no longer sleeping at the wheel at defensive coordinator. You have pieces to where you have to be able to play those other games outside of Alabama. But if you get past Alabama, you are driving, you are coasting, you are leading the pack in the SEC West. And I do think that right now, that game does decide who plays Georgia in Atlanta come December 4th.
All right, Cole, we asked you, since we don't have a Locked On Mississippi State host, asked you a little stretch assignment. What's the biggest storyline in your mind for Mississippi State Mike Leach heading into this season?
Full offseason to be able to learn the air raid system. That is the biggest thing I think I take away from this. This is going to be something that people are not used to in the SEC. You are not used to seeing a spread offense take over and that West Coast style really expand what you've seen out in the Pac-12. And that's something that Mike Leach brought into Starkville last year with KJ Costello. That was a big reason why Will Rogers, the redshirt freshman, wanted to stay with the program because it was a system that fit him better. He now has a full offseason to learn Leach's ins and outs. He has a full offseason to be able to pick up the cadence, pick up the offseason, pick up the stretches. And that's something that I do think is going to play a major factor into the starting quarterback battle. Mike Leach has done this year in and year out, been able to field an offense that does not know how to quit in both the Pac-12 and in the Big 12. Can he do it in the SEC? This is going to be big shoes to fill, I think, when you look in the SEC West in general, because the last thing you want to do is be this fun-loving, pirate-loving kind of guy, swing your sword and make a big impact week in and week out on the field when you do the hype and when you do the talking. You got to be able to back it up with a full offseason for these players to learn the system, with the full offseason to get a recruiting class that matches what Leach wants to run. That is going to be the biggest storyline to follow. Can this air raid system work in a conference that is known for defense, that is known for pushing the ball, known for rushing attacks? I mean, we talk about, Najee Harris being a 1,000-yard rusher. Isaiah Spiller was a 1,000-yard rusher. Kevin Harris was a 1,000-yard rusher. Jarian Early for, Ole Miss was a 1,000-yard rusher. This is a conference that still knows how to run the ball, and you're asking to be a spread offense consistently. Can it work in 2021, and can it work in a conference that's not known for being this type of offense? If so, you're going to have some problems. And maybe Mississippi State is not going to be, a 10-win team, a 12-win team going to the New Year's Six Bowl. But they could upset some teams. They could upset a couple of teams that are looking to be in that category, like you saw last year with LSU, like potentially you could see in the Egg Bowl against Ole Miss with their shoddy defense that we've seen that gives up 500 yards even though they score 500 yards. This is going to be a really interesting team, I think, because if they may not be at that same level as the Alabamas and the Texas A&Ms, but I'll tell you what, if Mike Leach's offense works, they're going to upset some teams that are looking to contend for a New Year's Six Bowl.
Cole Thompson, host of Locked On Aggies. Thanks so much for the time, man. Appreciate it.
Anytime, Gordy.
Continuing on our preview of the SEC West. And now we head out to Arkansas, where we're joined by our buddy John Nabors of Locked On Razorbacks to get his thoughts on the Hogs this year in year two of Sam Pittman. John Nabors, how are you, my friend? Would probably help if we unmuted you there. John, what's going on, man?
Chris, I am rolling. How about yourself?
We are good, man. Let's start with the Razorbacks. What's the biggest storyline for Arkansas heading into this season?
That's a question we have asked many times on the podcast. And honestly, the biggest question is just going to be just like many SEC teams or college football teams. It's the quarterback, KJ Jefferson. Arkansas is returning so many starters and a lot from their two deep, not only on the offensive side of the ball, defensive side of the ball. But specifically about the offense, the entire offensive line is returning. The majority of the wide receivers is returning, except for Mike Woods, who ended up transferring to Oklahoma, as we all know. And the heavy bulk of the running game is returning. Tight ends are returning. But KJ Jefferson is going to be the newest variable in that. So it's just a matter of how is KJ going to fit into Kendall Briles' offense? Is he going to be better suited for it than maybe what Felipe Franks was last year? Is he going to be able to be a leader on this offense? Because I think the defense will be fine. The offense is just going to come down to KJ Jefferson if he can take over the reins and be that guy.
What do you think is going to be the most consistent part of this team this year? I mean, is it having the experience of Treylon Burks, or what is it going to be on that offensive side of the ball?
I would think it would be, of course, Treylon Burks, who's just, to me, he's the best wide receiver in the SEC. The guy has literally 11.5-inch hands. He has to have 4 XL gloves. that's a great thing to have if you're a wide receiver. So he's incredible. It's just going to be a matter of, can they find ways to get him the ball? Because every defense is going to be keying on him. But as far as consistency goes, I'm looking at the running game. Treylon Smith was the running back last year that most people thought Rakeem Boyd would be the guy, but it ended up being Treylon Smith. He was really good in that system. And also Arkansas has been able to add in a couple of big time pieces. And I'm telling you right now, Chris, and everybody listening, watch out for Raheem Rocket Sanders. That's his name. He is a new player on Arkansas. He's a young player. He's a freshman. And he has been named the number 2 running back behind Treylon Smith. And everything I've been hearing about him out of practices, out of fall camp, and out of everybody who's been seeing it, is that he's about 235 pounds, 6'1", and he can score from anywhere on the field. I think he's going to be a big addition to this offense too. So I expect the running game to really wow some people, and to not only those running backs, but also KJ Jefferson get involved in it as well.
The defense brings back a lot. Grant Morgan, a big piece of this team. Bumper Pool, a lot of names we're familiar with. Can this defense get better this year, in your opinion?
I think they can. The biggest piece that they're going to be missing from last year is Jonathan Marshall, who, of course, was drafted in the NFL by the Jets. But they returned the majority of their defensive line. And again, linebackers coming back. Grant Morgan, you mentioned him. Bumper Pool's great. Jalen Catalon is an all-American caliber player. Ryan Pulley, or not Ryan Pulley, excuse me, that's an old one. Miles Slusher is a guy that is a defensive back that can play at any position in the secondary. And so with all these guys, Joe Fouché, another guy, they returned so much from a defense that was much more improved. The problem was last year when the defense did have their problems, it was because of depth. You get dinged up, you get tired, and it's really hard to finish out games when you're having those issues with depth. They've addressed that this offseason. They've added some key transfers, 2 defensive linemen from Missouri, where Barry Odom was, of course, the head coach there before he came to Arkansas. So I think the defense will not only be improved, but they potentially could be, barring any injury, one of the best defenses, top 5 defenses in the SEC when it's all said and done.
Well, let's talk expectations and ceiling for this team. And best case scenario, what is it for Arkansas this year?
Okay, now I'm probably going to get laughed at for saying this, but I'm just being honest. I think the ceiling is 9-3. I know people are looking at me like I'm crazy, and I'm not saying they will go 9-3. But when I think of ceilings or best case scenarios, the way I put it into perspective is, all right, find the games on the schedule that you think no matter what happens, Arkansas is not going to win. And I think Alabama, of course, is one of those games. I think Georgia is one of those games. And I think A&M at this point in time is one of those games. I could be wrong about that one. That's the one that's kind of borderline, but I still think A&M will beat Arkansas this year. But every other game left on the schedule, it would not be surprising to me if Arkansas won. So you're talking about 9 other games. I mean, are you going to sit there and say for sure that Arkansas is going to lose to Auburn or lose to Missouri or Ole Miss or LSU or Texas or any of these teams? No, but I think that if everything went according to plan, everything went right, the ball bounced their way, I could see this team absolutely going 9-3. And again, best case scenario for this team.
He is John Nabors, host of Locked On Razorbacks. Let our listeners know what you're going to have on the podcast throughout this season.
Well, throughout the season, of course, we're going to have various guests. We're going to make sure that anybody that is, we like to do the thing where whoever's calling the game the upcoming week, we like to have one of the broadcasters, whether it's a play-by-play, color commentary, or even a sideline reporter for that. So we're going to have that. We're going to have former players on a lot. I plan on getting a few of the all-time greats, guys like Darren McFadden, who came on the podcast last year. I plan on having him. Peyton Hillis is another guy. Matt Jones, some people would remember too. So we're going to make sure that we give plenty of reactions on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, plenty of preview, but also have some really great guests that'll be able to put things in perspective, not only from the player side of things, but also from the analyst side of things.
Great stuff, John Nabors. Thanks for the time, man.
Appreciate it, Chris. Have a good one, man.
That is just about going to do it for this edition of Locked On SEC, our SEC West preview. Thanks to all of our great Locked On hosts for getting us ready to go, previewing the entire SEC West today. If you missed our SEC East preview, you can find that wherever you find your podcast. Just search Locked On SEC, and we'll get you ready to go for the start of the season. When we talk to you again, it'll be next week, the start of the SEC season. We'll be previewing all the great games. We'll have some great guests throughout the week as well. You don't want to miss it. Subscribe now. Keep it locked right here to Locked On SEC. And a quick reminder, check out our friends over at Locked On Bets. your boy Q and Lee Sterling giving you the lock of the day. They'll be previewing all of the great games happening this weekend, presented by BetOnline.ag. Locked On Bets wherever you find your podcast. I'm Chris Gordy. You guys have a great weekend of week 0, and we'll be back next week getting you set for all the action in the SEC. Locked On SEC. I'm Chris Gordy. Have a great weekend, everybody.